Okay, we'll starting off the last few days with tzedakah and the chapter of Tehillim. So we give some tzedakah. Please pass around. Give from the coins or your own tzedakah. I'm going to say two chapters of Tehillim for our fellow Jews in the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael. Chapter 20 and chapter 150. Lam Natsayach Mitla David. Yancha Dinu Yem Sarah Yisakef Hashem Ele Yaakov. Yishlach Ezekah Mikodesh Mitzion Yisadeka. Yizkar Kol Mechesacha Vaylascha Yedash Nesela Yitein Lecha Chilovecha V'chalatzas Yimalei. Ran no chuzacha shem lehinu nidgal. Mali adinay kol mishalei sacha atayadati ki yeshia adinay meshecha yanei umishmekat shebegur seisha yaminay. Levereche ve'elabas asum nachnu mishkem adinay lehinu naskir. Hey makaronu falu nachnu kamnu anisaydad adinay yeshia hamelch yaneinu v'yayim karenu. And of course, we'll end off with 150. Hallelujah, hallelujah, el bekachai, hallelujah, bekia uzay. Halu b'gvaraysav, halu karoiv gudloy, halu b'seika shofar, halu b'nevel v'chinar, halu b'soif v'machal, halu b'minim v'ugav, halu b'tziltzele shama, halu b'tziltzele sirua, koilan shama ta'alel yah, hallelujah. Every single person in the world in Rich Hashem.
Amen.
Amen. As for the safety of our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. So you have the Gemaras. I'll give you pull out the article Gemara for a second. Everyone can follow along.
Okay.
There's the first one. There's one. And also I'm sure what the mini one is. There it is.
I break a seven.
Here's one. So we're holding here in the Gemara, in MEsechta Megillah, Daf Yudches Amud Aleph, 18a. A little bit further down the page, there's the exact spot, about 10 lines from the bottom, 12 lines from the bottom. We're having a discussion, which languages can one read the Megillah in? Could you read the Megillah only in Hebrew? Could you read the Megillah also in Greek? Could you read the Megillah in any language for people which understand only those foreign languages and don't understand Lashon Kodesh Hebrew or Greek? Practically, nowadays, no one or the vast majority of people, even those who know Greek, don't know the original ancient Greek, and therefore, halachically, one should hear the Megillah specifically written only, read in Hebrew, only written in Hebrew, and the question and exceptions to the rule would be if one happened to hear the Megillah from somebody reading a scroll written, let's say in English letters, but in Hebrew letters in English, if they have to hear the Megillah again, but when they make a bracha, that's a matter of discussion. 18a. 18a4. Yeah. The Gemara says, the Gemara is explaining the next words of the Mishnah, the next phrase of the Mishnah, which says, "Ha'loyes sheshama ashuris yatzachulu." We explained until now that if somebody knows Hebrew, they cannot hear the Megillah in a different language if they understand Hebrew. How about someone which does not understand Hebrew? Are they Yotzei? Have they fulfilled their obligation of hearing the Megillah? Is it necessary to understand what you're hearing? Or do we say that it's necessary to hear the words? For example, that by davening, the main thing is, when it comes to Shema, to say the words in Hebrew, even if you don't understand it. And the word Shemona Esrei is repeated because many people did not know how the word is Shemona Esrei, and they would listen to the words of Shemona Esrei. So over there, when it comes to davening, the main thing is the Hebrew words of it, at least in Shema and Shemona Esrei.
In those days, they didn't have any sidurins. So you had to listen to the chazan,
Right?
say it along with him.
That's true. But what about hearing it in Hebrew when you're coming to listening to the Megillah? Is it similar to davening that you're yotzei, you fulfill your obligation even if you don't understand it? Or do you specifically need to understand it? So the Gemara asks like this. The Mishnah stated that anybody who heard the Megillah, even someone who does not speak Ashuris, biblical Hebrew, you have fulfilled your obligation even if you don't understand it. Ask the Gemara, but you don't understand what's being read in the Megillah. How can it be considered fulfilling your obligation of hearing the Megillah? Answers the Gemara, Midi dahava anashim v'am haaretz. It is similar to a case of women who generally at that point were not able to learn to read and to write, and they did not understand the words of Megillah generally at that point in time. Of course, there were exceptions. There were women, Bruria, the wife of Rameir, but most women at that time did not know how to even read and definitely understand the words of the Megillah. And we said before, the women are obligated to hear the Megillah because they were part of the miracle of Purim. So since they have an obligation to hear the Megillah, and most women did not understand the Megillah, so we see that the understanding of the Megillah is not the main part of hearing the Megillah. The main part of the Megillah is, the main reason we read the Megillah is Pirsumei Nisa, to publicize the miracle of Purim. So the Gemara answers, so if you have a person who is unlearned, an ignorant person, Rebbi Akiva himself called himself an Amma Aretz. The great Rebbi Akiva, until the age of 40, he did not even know the Aleph-Beis.
Which is remarkable.
How much he was able to advance.
Yeah, no, it's like actually nowadays, it's like women. Yeah, but even nowadays, actually, it's like actually most Jews, who's no matter the background, at least actually know Aleph-Beis if they went over to Hebrew school or something.
Right. So just like the woman and those who are not learned and fulfill their obligation of the Megillah, even if they don't understand what they're hearing. So to anyone who doesn't, even if they're learned but they don't understand Hebrew, it's okay for them to hear the Megillah in the Holy Tongue, because the main idea of hearing the Megillah is to publicize the miracle of Purim. Continues the Gemara, Mask la Ravina asks a question. The previous statement that we learned from the case of an unlearned man or a woman who does not understand Hebrew, that we learned from there that anyone who does not understand Hebrew, does not understand what the words in the Megillah say, can fulfill their obligation. Do we need to come on to a proof from that situation? How about us personally? Anan, we, even Ravina, he says, Hachshtranim, b'nei haramachim, miyadinan. It says, this is in chapter 8 of the Megillah, this is when Achashverosh signed the second set of letters that the Jews can now protect themselves. And he sent down messengers. So just a few days before that, on the 13th of Nisan, Haman, or the 12th of Nisan, Haman just convinced Achashverosh to agree to make a decree to destroy all the Jews in his entire kingdom. He sent out letters to all the countries. Events moved very quickly, as we learned in the great length in the explanation of the Megillah. And already less than a week later, already the second or third day of Pesach, the king already, second day of Pesach, the king already hung Haman. And on the 23rd of Sivan, a month later, the king told Mordechai and Esther, write any decree you want and send it out to all the Jews in the kingdom. And they sent out second messengers. And it uses a name for the type of messengers that were sent. And when we were learning it back then, we had old drawings from Persia, from the palaces of Achashverosh, with these types of horses that they used. They're a very unique type of horse, they're a crossbreed of certain species. It's called Achshronim b'nei haramachim. The king sent letters, Berotzim basusim, the runners on horseback, those that rode on the royal steeds, b'nei haramachim, who were bred from the royal steeds. Right? Just like today, they breed racehorses, they breed very fast horses. So back then, for the king's mail service, they also bred very fast horses, and these were the horses that were used. But the term is a very, the average, even if you know Hebrew very well, I doubt you ever heard these words, which means the types of the royal steeds bred of the herd. I doubt anybody heard of these words before.
We have actually English words actually that I sometimes wonder why anybody would write them, because it's like you wonder who knows this word.
Correct. Right, so it says that some of these words appear only one more time in Tanakh. Some of these words come from a Persian word. So these are very uncommon words that are written in the Megillah. How about the word Shtarpanim? Shtarpanim are certain type of officers, ministers. So even a person who's fluent and speaks Lashon Kodesh, the holy tongue, his entire life, every single day, even they don't understand every word of the Megillah. So how is it? So just from the obligation of hearing the Megillah, you understand that you don't have to understand the words in the Megillah. You just have to be there to help the miracle be publicized. So why do you need to bring a proof, asks Ravina, from the fact that a woman who can't understand Hebrew, or the Am Haaretz, ignorant, unlearned person who can't understand Hebrew, that they have to hear the Megillah? Bring a proof from us, or for anybody, even those who are fluent in Hebrew. There's words in the Megillah that most people don't know what they mean, and still we have an obligation to hear the Megillah, including those words. So, again, in the words of the Gemara, do we ourselves know the meaning of these words? The royal steeds bred from the royal herds. Still, we could infer from here, the main mitzvah of reading the Megillah is to publicize the miracle of Purim. Hachanami mitzvahs kriya pursume nisa. So too here in this case of someone who does not understand Hebrew at all, they nevertheless fulfill their obligation of hearing the Megillah being read in Lashon Kodesh in Hebrew, because it's a mitzvah to publicize the miracle of Purim.
If that's the case, then theoretically, a deaf person could come to be part of the mitzvah of Pursume Nisa and not hear the Megillah at all.
Just by rote of them
by being there, he's taking part of Pursume Nisa, no?
Saying just the fact that they're there in the, where it's happening, perhaps. I mean, saying if Pursume Nisa does not have to do with understanding it, and perhaps I'm saying, halachically, you have to hear every word, and if you miss a word, you're missing, you're missing the obligation. So perhaps maybe there's two different chiyuvim here: one chiyuv to hear the Megillah, and one chiyuv for Pursume Nisa. It's possible. I don't know.
I mean, we hold that you can't hear it over the phone, right? So that it's there is a thing of being there, being present in the room. True?
No, definitely correct.
So okay.
Right, I'm saying, but right. So what is the geder? I have a sefer at home called Pirsumei Nisa, all about Purim. Has like tons and tons of explanations all about Purim. But in the beginning, they have a large section just about the mitzvah of Pirsumei Nisa, Hagdara. I'll have to check it out. What actually Bnei HaRamachim means? Hachshkranim Bnei HaRamachim. There's Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the Yeibitz, father of the Chacham Tzvi. He writes as a type of camel. Your ancestor?
Well, he was a cousin of mine, but
Oh.
with the father of Rebbi Yaakov Emden.
That's his father of the Yeibitz. Okay.
Yeah.
So he says that it's talking about a type of camel which is able to run very quickly. That's what it means. Achshranim b'nei haramachim. Now, Rabbeinu Hananel on the side, if you have an actual Gemara in front of you on the side, he brings a very interesting minhag from a city called Sarkasta. I'm not sure where that is. Sarkosta, maybe it's a city, perhaps a city in Spain back in the days. And it says that they would read the Megillah for a woman in the city of Sarkosta from a special Megillah written in the local language, or whatever the language was over there, Spanish because women do not understand Hebrew. That's what Rabbeinu Hananel brings. So he's a posek, and none of the other poskim afterwards agree with him, and the Shulchan Aruch does not agree with him either as well, for two reasons. First of all, if one woman does understand Hebrew, then they can't hear it in a foreign language. They can only hear it in Hebrew. In addition to that, the one reading the Megillah preferably should not be someone who understands Hebrew either. And also, it says over here in the Gemara that even Ravina did not know what Achshranim b'nei haramachim, the exact meaning of the words are. So how could you write a valid or accurate translation of the Megillah in a different language? It's not possible. If Ravina didn't know what it was, how could someone writing the Megillah in a different language know what it is?
Well, nobody's Yotzi, then.
Correct. If you're reading in a different language.
Even
In the original language, you don't have to understand what it means.
If
If in Hebrew, you don't have to understand it. So the one who wrote this, his name was a Rivash, also one of the Rishonim. And he had his teacher, famous teacher, his name was Reb Nissim Gaon, the Ran. Not Nissim Gaon, the Rabbeinu Nissim, the Ran, printed in the back of the Gemaras. And when he told this to the Ran, his teacher, his Ran said, in theory, you're right. However, Rabbeinu Hananel does have what to rely on. Because when he says Ravina in the Gemara was saying we don't know what Ramachim, Achronim, Bnei Ramachim means, doesn't mean that we don't know what it means. They do know what it means. The Amirim do know what it means, but rather that the average person is not familiar with that. Even people which know Hebrew don't understand uncommon words. You have to be someone who's like a professor, like the Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah scholars. They knew what it meant. But then the Ran says, in this particular case, in Sarkosta, I know that they had, in their particular translation, there were some mistakes that came in. So there, they should not do it. They should not listen to it. But Rabbeinu Hananel, what he wrote, I'm saying what he did, about the city of Sarkosta is not that far off. It has a valid place. All right, let's continue with another interesting Gemara. Hara Serogin Yatsa. If one read the Megillah with breaks, they have not fulfilled their obligation. I'm sorry, they have fulfilled their obligation. Meaning they read the Megillah chapter 1, took a break, later on chapter 2, ate breakfast, and later on they read chapter 3 and 4.
Ah,
As long as they heard the entire Megillah, they had fulfilled their obligation.
even though should we say bracha before the bracha after? I guess it's like.
Correct.
Which one, like B'diavad, in other words, we're supposed to do it.
Right.
Anyway.
It's not like Shemona Esrei. Shemona Esrei, if you make an interruption in the middle,
Mhm.
and interruption is the length of time that it would take you to finish Shemona Esrei from that point that you're holding till the end,
Mhm.
then you have to daven Shemona Esrei again. Shemona Esrei has to be one continuation.
I thought we had heard, at least there was a different opinion on that, that you had to, you couldn't leave the Megillah in the middle.
Fair.
I mean, just maybe remembering wrong, but
About reading it out of order. I mean, you can't read chapter 2 before chapter 1,
maybe that's it.
and it has to be read in order. As long as you heard it in order, you're okay, you're fine, you fulfilled your obligation. You don't even have to have the same person reading it. You had to have different people switching off in the middle of the Megillah.
I mean, I guess actually it's like, it could be relevant, but even without people actually, like, a purpose to say, oh, well, we're going to take a break, suppose actually have a hospital situation where people have to have actually breaks in between, so.
Right.
So you have what
You're
you
saying,
allowed, right?
Yeah, you remember many years ago, there was a doctor, a OBGYN. He was in the hospital. He had the night shift on Purim. So he asked if I could come read the Megillah for him. I think it was at 12 o'clock at night in the doctor's lounge, the maternity ward in the hospital. So yeah, I read the Megillah for him. But he was whatever. There was 2 Jewish doctors who came, and one of them, as soon as we started reading the Megillah, I remember I had to run out. Because there's some, he's looking at the screens that are in the doctor's lounge, and he saw something come up and he had to run out. So technically, if he could come back afterwards and continue from where he's up to in that part of the Megillah and fulfill the rest of the obligation, right? Fulfill his obligation of hearing the Megillah. The word serugin means intervals. It's a common word, I think, in Hebrew also, serugin. However, it wasn't, I guess, a common word back then. The word in the Mishnah, and the Chachamim did not know what it means. So, Kara serugin, if one read the Megillah in intervals with breaks, they have fulfilled their obligation. Says the Gemara, a story, an anecdote. And with this anecdote, we'll read about one of the interesting teachers from the times of the Mishnah. Lehavu yadi rabbanan mai serugin. The sages did not know what the word serugin meant, which it says in the Mishnah, until Shamua la'amsa devei Rebbi. One day they went into Yehuda Hanasi's house. Some say they went into his house to ask him, what does the word serugin mean? And they heard the maidservant was cleaning in the house of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. The Ka'amar Lehul Rabbanan, the Havu Aili, and when the Chachamim, the sages were coming in, and they were coming in with small groups. Instead of coming all at once, they came a few at a time. The Havu'aili piski levei Rebbi, and they were coming in small groups intermittently to the house of Rebbi. And she told them, Ad masai atem nichnasin serugin. How long are you going to enter the house in intervals, intermittently? Why don't you all come in at once? Maybe she, was upset. Come in at once, make your mess and leave. Don't come in, and make messes the entire day. But from there, they understood that the word serugin means intermittently. So they never had to go to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi to even ask what serugin means, according to the Rashba. And from there, they understand what it means, that serugin means intervals.
I hope they apologize to the maid, otherwise she probably was angry with them.
They're leaving right away. Now, the Sas Emes, the first Gerer Rebbe, he has a little twist on his Gemara, and he says, how is it possible the Chachamim did not know what the word serugin intervals means. They didn't understand the Mishnah. It says Atah b'dvar Mishnah. If someone makes a mistake in the Mishnah, he can't be a rabbi anymore. Can't be a rav. How could they not know what it means? So he says they knew Seirgin means intervals. They just didn't know if it means a short interval or could even include a long break, a long interval. Because from our Mishnah, it sounds it has to be even a long break, you're fine. But they wanted to know if it means specifically a short one or a long one. And when they're coming into the house of Yehuda Hanasi, and the maidservant told them, stop taking your time, and understood that even it's a long break.
A short break too, right?
Short, yeah.
And see, so there's so it's a clarification. They thought only a long break.
Right. They wanted to know, does the word Seirgin mean only a long break, or does it also mean a short break? And they learned that Seirgin also means a short break.
Right.
Because they were taking whatever time there is to come from one to the next. Even a short break is considered to be it's not continuous.
I mean, it makes sense actually. Like a sharper focus as far as actually the word. Yeah.
It's logically, it's a very confusing situation because you have to hear it in Hebrew. You have a word that's not Hebrew.
Right.
I mean, it seems to change the whole logic or potential logic of how rabbis are following. They're basing things on hearing it in Hebrew, but have a word that they don't understand that's not Hebrew.
In the Mishnah, you're saying?
Yeah.
The word Seirgin is from the Mishnah. And they wanted to know what the word in the Mishnah meant. The Mishnah said that Seirgin Yatza. One reads it in intervals. But the Megillah itself would technically be all Hebrew, although it seems like some words are like incorporated from Persian.
Like Purim.
Purim, right. It's originally a Persian word, right. It seems like a lot of the words of the Megillah itself are incorporated from Persian into, or even Babylonian, Elamite, maybe into Hebrew, not originally.
It's like you have actually words from Persian officials.
Achsharpanim, Hapachos, right.
Oh yeah, exactly, yeah. They have become a part of Hebrew afterwards, actually, like another word.
So later on, a pacha is a pasha. Pasha was a ruler, right? So you're saying the words that aren't part of the Hebrew of the Chumash later on became part of the Hebrew of Nevi'im and Ksuvim, right? The later parts of Tanakh. So that could be confusing for, let's say, someone only learned Chumash, right? Or Chitas, you're learning just Chumash, and now you have new words that are introduced. So technically, it's not really. It is Hebrew, but it's not Hebrew that we're familiar with. I understand. Yeah. I agree.
And linguists will be able to tell you, the way this one is speaking Hebrew is from this era. The one with this, but to us as lay people, we don't necessarily notice this exactly.
Fine. So there's a few different stories about the Amsa de Rebbi. Our Gemara is going to have 3 anecdotes about the maidservant of Rebbi. She obviously, growing up in Rebbi's house, Rebbi Hanasi's house, she must have been something, very special, very unique, just from hearing so many things around. We're going to see a few different stories throughout the different Gemaras, how she was actually someone very unique, someone very special. She actually lived a very long life for those years. She lived, I think, to be 98 years old.
Even for these years.
Especially in those years, it was considered to be a very long life.
Exactly.
Well, now, even the Rebbe Maharash, for example, there's things he could learn from the Rebbe Maharash's even non-Jewish people who worked for him or worked in his house. For example, many Hasidim wanted to know about the Rebbe Maharash, Rebbe Shmuel of Lubavitch. He passed away in 1883. What does he do, like privately? So he had a non-Jewish wagon driver. He was very, for his health, every day he used to take a drive outside of the town of Lubavitch and to get fresh air in the woods. So they wanted to know, what does he do? What goes on over there? And Rebbe Maharash himself, he used to act very regally, royally, with beautiful clothes, a nice wagon. And one time they got the wagon driver, they gave him, a non-Jewish, typical Russian peasant, and they gave him lots of free mashke, lots of free booze to drink, and he drank a lot. And then he says, "You Chassidim, you're all, foolish people. What are you making a big deal out of him? Out of this Rebbe of yours? I know him personally 101. What's He says, tell us what goes on." He says, it's nothing special. He says, I take him out, we go into the forest, and we go, a little bit. We stop and he walks into the woods. And as soon as, he walked into the woods, he sits down on a hill full of ants, and he sits down, lets himself get bitten, and he starts crying, doing either saying Tikkun Chatzos or Tshuva, whatever he's doing. And he says, why is he crying? Look at him. He has a beautiful family. He has a very, he has hundreds of thousands of people who look up to him. Is everything he could ever possibly want. Is financially very successful. And what's he doing and crying like this? So even from somebody who just hangs out in the house of a tzaddik, of someone, especially someone like a Rebbe or Yehuda Hanasi, you could learn a lot from. There's someone who lives in Crown Heights today. Her name is Faye, a black woman, but she used to be a cleaning help in the Rebbe and Rebbetzon's house. She says very amazing, wonderful things like about the time there. She had no idea. She just thought it was a nice older couple that she was going to work for. So people would stop her on the street and says, "Tell me what goes on over there. What's in that house?" Well, they're nice people.
That's with the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Yeah.
Now the other Rebbe was the Rebbe Rashab, right?
Friedrich Rebbe Rashab, Rebbe Marash.
No, it's from the anthill.
No, the Rebbe Marash.
Rebbe Marash, who was the father of the Rebbe.
Father of Rebbe Rashab, yeah.
Who was the father.
Yeah. Interestingly, there's no picture of the Rebbe Marash that's at least publicized, even though he lived in the 1880s.
Good.
So learning from So learning from someone who's a help in their house, you could definitely learn a lot. So just from the words being used by the maidservant of Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi, they're able to learn a lot. Learn another 2 stories in this Gemara about the maidservant of Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi. L'havu yadi rabbanan, our sages likewise did not know the meaning of the word Saseleha utre memeka. It's a pasuk in Mishlei by Shlomo HaMelech, and it's talking about the government, like those who are in power. Saseleha utre memeka. Esteem her, and she will exalt you. You should honor those who are put in power. Sorry, skip one. Chalaglugas. Lahabu yadi rabbanan my chalaglugas. Their word chalaglugas, which appears in several Mishnahs and Brises, in Shavias, MEsechta Yuma, they did not know what the word chalaglugas meant. Shamu al-am sedevei Rabbi. They went into Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi's house to ask him, and they heard the maidservant of Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi saying, "The Amr lahu gavra, mivadir parpechini." There was a man who was scattering purslane. I did not know what that was, and I had to check it up over here. Purslane, it's a common type of food.
Grows wild around here.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Interesting.
All over the place.
So I guess it's poisonous or not, I don't know.
It's not.
It's not. So this is purslane.
They put it in salads.
Yeah?
I think there's I showed somebody cutting it up on
On this thing.
what is personally edible.
Over there. So they're weeds, but they're I guess they're edible. So she saw there's somebody who was scattering it all over, and she told him, "An masai ata mefazer chalagladlecha." And to how long are you going to make a mess and spread out all your chalaglecha, your purslane? And from this I understood what chalaglugas means purslane. Another similar story. We have a yadi rabbanan mai sasaleo tren memeka. They did not know the meaning of the word salsaleha. Now, someone who sings very nice in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, is called silsul. Silsul is like improving your voice, voice lessons. Silsul akol, to showing off with their voice, sort of. But they did not know what the word salsala in Mishlei means. Esteem her and she will exalt you. She will bring you honor and you will embrace her. They did not know what the words mean, what the word salsala means. Shamua, they heard, la'am sedevei Rebbi, the maidservant of Rebbi's household. Then she told a certain man who was playing around with us here. And he was curling his hair, maybe a long payas, he was curling his payas. She told him, how long are you going to be misalsel? Means to turn over and to play around, to delve into your hair. And the Chachamim explain this pasuk to mean, salseleha, if you will delve, if you will turn over, meaning Torah, if you will learn a lot of Torah, and you turn it over and over, repeat it, delve into it, go deeper, the Torah will elevate you. And they explained it to mean it's going on Torah. So from listening to the maidservant of Rebbi, of Yehuda Hanasi, they were able to learn the meaning of many different words. So this maidservant of Rebbi, she's brought down in several other Gemaras. One is when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the day she passed away. It says, on the day Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi passed away, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he was ben son after son from David HaMelech. Unlike his father, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was killed by the Romans, right? He was honored by the Romans. The Roman Emperor Antoninus was his best friend. And he was the one who wrote down Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral Torah. The first writing down of Torah Shabbat Peh was through Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. The day that he passed away, the sages decreed a fast. Ubo Rachame, and they begged for mercy. Amri, and they said, anybody who says Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi passed away, we will stab them with the sword. Meaning they were so sure and confident Yehuda Hanasi is going to get better, that they said anybody who says anything the opposite, we're going to stab them, we're going to punish them. Slike Amse the Rebbi Leigra, maidservant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and went onto the roof, and she felt so bad for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi because she's in the house and she sees the big pain Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is having. He's in tremendous pain. And she felt so bad for him. Why should he suffer in this world? So she went up to the roof and she announced, the upper realms, the higher worlds, are requesting the presence of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. However, those in lower worlds, meaning his students and the Jewish nation, also want Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi to be with them. May it be Hashem's will that the lower world should impose their will upon the upper world, meaning let Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi live and survive. Once she saw he would have to enter the bathroom many times. Every time he would go in, he would have to take off his tefillin, and then he would then he would exit and put it back on, and he had tremendous pain in his intestines. I changed my mind. May it be Hashem's will that the upper worlds, the Malachim, should win, because let him stop suffering. The sages would not be silent. They would not stop begging mercy from Hashem. And as long as they were davening, Hashem left Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi alone and not let him die. So what did she do? She wanted to stop them from davening. She wanted Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi to stop suffering. Shakla Kuza, she took a jug. Shadya me'igra la'ara, and she threw it from the roof to the ground. And when the big crash happened, ishtaku, everyone got quiet for a moment of silence. Like, what's this big boom that suddenly happened? This big crash. Mirachmi, and they stopped asking, begging Hashem for mercy temporarily. Benach nafshei de Rebbi, and Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi passed away then. So she was, if you say, instrumental, either in her passing away, but on the other hand, also in Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi stopping to suffer. And later on, the story is that Yehuda Hanasi, nobody wanted to, remember they made a decree, no one could say he passed away. So Yehuda Hanasi had a student, Bar Kapara, who went into Yehuda Hanasi to check what's happening. He came back out and he tore his garment and then he hid it so nobody should see that he realized that Yehuda Hanasi passed away. And he started speaking in hints and hinted to the fact that Yehuda Hanasi passed away. And they asked him, he passed away. And he said, you said it, not me. Right, that's one story of the Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi's servant. The Arizal writes, not Arizal, sorry, Chaim Vital, right, the student of the Arizal, that the student of that the Amsa, the Amma is a maidservant, and Chassidus talks about the difference between an Eved and an Amma. In Parashas Mishpatim, there's many Mamarim from the Rebbi in the early years, Yubez. There's and in Tafar Shamach Vav, the famous Mamarim, there's several Mamarim about Umikne Rav, about an Eved, a servant. They have three different types of, in the beginning of Parashas Mishpatim, different types of slaves. You have Eved Ivri, a Jewish servant, Eved Knani, a non-Jewish servant, and Amma Hivriya, a Jewish maidservant. And each one of them has a different job, a different task. One is going on the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul. One is going on the Midas, the emotions of the Nefesh HaLekis, that's going on the Jewish servant. And then you have the Amma Hivriya. Amma Hivriya is a Jewish maidservant. The mitzvah is for the master who buys her to marry her, meaning you take her from the level of being a Eved, a servant, to being a Isha, a woman who's the center of the home. And it's going on the Nefesh HaLekis, on the godly soul. So the Amsa de Rebbi, the maidservant of Yehuda Hanasi, is going on his neshama. And the neshama did not agree to leave the world. And so they're saying, may the neshama also agree to go to the higher world. That's how the Chaim Vital and Neibshitz brings him down in Yaris Zavash, that on this story of Yehuda Hanasi's servant. Chaim Vital also writes, during Kriyas Yamsuf, the crossing of the sea, when the Moshe Rabbeinu split the sea and the Jews crossed, it says that Rasa Shifcha Layam Ma Shalei Rasa Yecheskel Ben Buzi. Even a maidservant crossing the sea saw greater revelations of Hashem, more of godliness than even Yecheskel, the prophet who spoke about the Merkava, the chariot of Hashem, which is the greatest revelations in Navi. And a Shifcha, a maidservant, by the crossing the Yamsuf, was able to see godliness more than Yecheskel. And so he says that the maidservant of Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi was a Gilgal, was an neshama of one of those maidservants who crossed the sea. There's another story about Rebbi Yehuda Hanasi's servant. Over here, where the Gemara Ma'ikot and Yazayin Amar Aleph, about could a maidservant put someone into cherem. Shifcha Beis Rebbi Maihu. The Amsa de Beis Rebbi. There was one time the maidservant in the house of Yehuda Hanasi. Chazise lehu gavra davi machi livnoi hagadol. She saw a man who had a grown-up son, over bar mitzvah, and the man was trying to discipline his son, and he hit his son. Then it was quite common to hit a child, but the son was already grown up, and the father hit the son to discipline him. Amna and the maidservant said, "V'heviahu gavra b'shamta." Let this man be put into cherem. Rabbi Karp, how should we say cherem? Not excommunication, right? Cherem should be someone who. Karp always says a different word, not excommunicate. But someone who, but he's excommunicated from the people that he's not allowed to be among his fellow Jews as a punishment. Because he is transgressing the injunction, don't place a stumbling block in front of the blind, meaning if one strikes his adult son, then the son is already grown up. He's able to hit the father back, and if the father instigates the son by hitting him first, the son will hit back the father, and then the son could hit the father to the extent that the father could start bleeding, and then the son has transgressed a lav, a prohibition in the Torah, which is actually a chi of misa. If one hits their father and the father bleeds, it's a chi of misa. It's an obligation of death, a death penalty. And it's a prohibition to hit one's parent. So therefore, a father should not hit their adult son. So the Amsa, the maidservant of Yehuda Hanasi, put this man into cherem, into excommunication, because he was hitting his adult son. Another story of the Amsa de Rebbi, the maidservant of Yehuda Hanasi. I thought I brought up the Gemara on the screen. I guess not. But there's...
How did one acquire a maidservant?
Back then?
Yeah.
It was common even till contemporary times.
Were they poor women or something?
Yeah, generally poor women, and they hired themselves out. They're sort of like live-ins. So I don't know if they were slaves, like not in a slavery type of way, but more like a woman who lived in the house and a poor woman. You could call them a governess.
It wasn't because they stole something the way some people were, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Men were
right. In the Torah, a Jewish man who steals and can't pay back, he gets sold as a slave until paying back to pay back that amount. Women don't get sold for that. A woman can't get sold for stealing. Only men. The only case in the Torah where a woman could be sold is a girl under the age of bas mitzvah, over the age of 7, or over the age of 6 or 7, and her father is very poor and is allowed to sell her not as a slave, but more as a helper, hire her out as a helper, but has a lot of classifications called the amma, a maidservant, and that the master can marry her, have to treat her well, etc. But women don't get sold for stealing. Only men do. In the Yalkut Shimoni, it says that at the age of 92, the maidservant of Rebbi Hanasi was able to taste a dish and to start commenting about the taste of the dish. There's another story about Rebbi Hanasi. He had tremendous pains in his life. He says it was a punishment. He was very wealthy, but there was a punishment to him because I thought I brought the Gemara up on the screen, but I didn't apparently. Because one time he was in a shlachta, is a place where they're shechting cattle, and there was a calf that was very scared of being shechted, being slaughtered, and hid itself in the cloak of Rebbi Hanasi. And Rebbi Hanasi said, Zil lakach netzarta. Don't be scared, go ahead and let yourself be shechted, because this is a purpose for what you were created for. And it says from Shemayim, they're very makbid, they're very strict on Tzaddik Rebbi Hanasi to say that. And he said he himself started suffering for many, many years, and for 7 years for sufferings. And he had tremendous, I don't know, today it might be called kidney stones. for many years. And it says, and he would go to the bathroom, he'd have tremendous pain. And as the Gemara says that, I think it's the Gemara, I think, that the Yehuda Hanasi had over 10,000 heads of cattle, and his stable boy, like the one in charge of his cattle, would let them all out to pasture at the time. Yehuda Hanasi would go out to the bathroom. They should make noise, and it should drown out the screams of Yehuda Hanasi. And nevertheless, his pain was so strong that his screams overpowered that noise. People still could hear it. And how did it go? How did it go away? It says because one time Yehuda Hanasi's maidservant was sweeping in the house, and there was a small, not a den, like a nest maybe of mice in the house. And so Yehuda Hanasi's maidservant, you can imagine, even today the women aren't too fond of the mice. And so she wanted to get rid of them with her broom. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, leave them alone. It says, it says Hashem, who's saying Asher, Hashem has mercy on all of his creations. And have mercy on the mice too, don't disturb them. And from Shemayim, from heaven, they said that since Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is having Rachmanis on other creations, therefore they're going to have mercy on him. And then his pains went away. It says even though his pains were so great, it did not compare to the pains of the son of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. He had other pains, but that's it's a different story for a different time. So, but in general, we see that even someone who's a maidservant in the house of Yehuda Hanasi, she wasn't such a simple person. She herself was a very unique person, and you're able to learn very much from them.
Did he have other family in the house?
Rabbi Hanasi?
Yeah, the children, the wives.
I'm sure he did. He had many children, and the Reish Galusas of the different generations.
What didn't he have Tabi?
Have what?
Tabi, the servant Tabi?
Tavi? I think it was Rebbi Gamliel.
The servant.
Wasn't it Rebbi Gamliel?
Okay. I was getting mixed up.
Not sure that's his grandfather or great-great-grandfather, which Rebbi Gamliel it was. Right? Yehuda Hanasi and Gamliel, Tavi is mentioned in the Mishnah, and Rebbi is like the end of the Mishnah. Right, so
Jewish maidservant, you don't know.
Who?
The maidservant.
Seems like she was, yeah.
Right?
Seems like she was. Because how could she go ahead and put someone in cherem, right, in excommunication, unless she was Jewish? A non-Jew cannot do it.
So could an individual put somebody in cherem?
Could an individual put someone in cherem?
Yeah.
So MEsechta Megillah, it talks about it. So a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, is allowed to put someone in cherem, and an agent of a Torah scholar could put someone in cherem as well. So, for example, a messenger from Beis Din sends a messenger to someone, and the person insulted the messenger, said not going to listen. The messenger has the ability to put them in cherem, even though he's not a Torah scholar. So an agent, so a Talmid Chacham could put someone in cherem, and a Torah scholar could put someone in cherem. Otherwise, a regular individual cannot put someone in cherem for the entire community, because it will be a free-for-all then. Everyone, I don't like you, we're putting you in cherem. It has to be done through a Beis Din.
Can a woman put someone in cherem?
Well, if they're an agent of a Torah scholar, we see the maidservant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and put someone in cherem.
So, you can put yourself in cherem.
It's actually a question about that. Yes, it is possible. Yes, if someone put themselves in cherem, it's halacha. Rama brings it down that someone could put themselves in cherem, but they can't take themselves out of cherem, because any chavash matir satzmei, someone who's tied up cannot untie themselves. They can put themselves into cherem, but they're not allowed to be matir on themselves. There's many more halachas. If someone had a dream and they were put into cherem in a dream, they have to keep the cherem, and they have to go to get at least three people together to be matir the cherem. Nowadays, it's very uncommon, just the way our world is made up today. And the power has been taken away from most Beis Dins outside of Eretz Yisrael, outside of Israel, for all practical reasons. The Beis Din doesn't have the power. And even in Eretz Yisrael and Israel, they don't have the power like the courts have. So cherem is not really used today. And on the contrary, if a Bezdin puts someone in cherem today, it could be very harmful for the reputation of the Bezdin. Because if people say, if you put someone in cherem and no one's listening to it, no one's listening to the cherem, then they sort of say, oh, you're not listening to the Bezdin for this, you're not going to listen to the Bezdin and other things too. So, I mean, there are exceptions. They try not doing a cherem, they give it a different name called a seruv, which is like no one should communicate with them, but there's no way of enforcing it. You can't force people to stay away from this person.
So how could they enforce it in the old days?
In the olden days, they could definitely enforce it, yeah.
By what?
Yeah, the community had a prison outside of every shul, right? There's a prison room or a stockade, and
Or was someone to talk to them, did he get punished?
he had a kehillah. The Rav was the ultimate power. People used to get punished by the kehillah back in the days. You could get fined by the kehillah. Nowadays, if I don't know, if you talk during shul, right? Is a rabbi of the shul coming over to you and say, okay, you have to pay $1,000 fee to the shul, or no one in the shul is going to talk to you? And, it doesn't work like that anymore. It used to work like that until not too distant past. Anyways, okay, we should have only simchas. Instead of talking about cherem, we're talking about